Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 337 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is a familiar voice on the podcast. Catherine Knibbs joins us once again. She's a child psychotherapist, doctoral candidate, author and TEDx speaker. Catherine describes herself as a human technologist and is the originator of the term cyber trauma, a concept she developed to shed light on how technology and the internet can cause lasting harm, especially to children. In today's conversation, Catherine will share her insights on what we must consider when protecting client data online. So with that said, roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Very warm welcome to episode 337 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both myself, Ken Kelly, and my colleague Rory Oakes are delighted to welcome you to our three topics today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where today a sad yet important topic, and that's talking to children about death, grief, loss. We then move on to practice matters. An important interview today. Rory reached out, and he's teed this up beautifully in the beginning. Rory reached out to speak with Catherine Knibbs, discussing the impact of the recent Apple change. Well, it was directed from the UK government to remove end-to-end encryption on data storage. How does that affect us as counsellors and psychotherapists? And then into student services, recognising you, students, on your formal journey to become a counsellor, psychotherapist. And we're going to be speaking about the sometimes frustrating occurrence of when a client does not attend your session. You're trying to get those placement hours in and you get a DNA, a do not attend. What do we do there? So let's get back to the beginning. Ethical, sustainable practice, Rory, an important topic, talking to children about death.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And this has been generated from a conversation that I've had within my family. I have a granddaughter and she's going to be 5 very shortly. And she's started to sort of ask the questions around death. What is death? And she saw some flowers at a scene of an accident, had asked mum what happened. And I think it's also something that appears in the therapy room. It may be a client is struggling to talk about the death of their partner to the child, or it may be if you're a child therapist, this comes up. I mean, there's lots of good advice about, and I think I first start off by saying, I think in general, talking to children about the circle of life is a wonderful thing. And when I mean the circle of life, I mean just observing growth and death in life. And that could be plants, it could be the trees shedding the leaves. At the moment, it's spring here in the UK, so we're seeing the lifting of trees and plants and beginning to come into life. But in the autumn, of course, the trees, some trees shed their leaves. And I think having those conversations of life being cyclic with children is really, really useful. And by showing examples and, children may know other children have pets that have died. And I think introducing that topic in a very supportive way, but in a very kind of normalised way, because the fact of the matter is we have a circle of life. People are born, they live, and they die. I think that some of the advice actually is quite interesting, and if a child asks you directly, because what the advice says, and I've had a look at a lot of charities, they've said, talk about the more physical aspects of it, the fact that, the lungs stop working, the brain stops working, the heart stops working. And at that point, the person is no longer a person, And I guess as a parent myself, I would only share as much information as was asked for. I think, children will ask for some information. Don't kind of overcook it, because children can only take in so much. It's a very, very delicate subject, and it can also lead to specific psychological presentations from children. And one of those, Ken, is magical thinking, where children may believe that in some way they've contributed to the death of a parent or a loved one. It's and it has to be handled very, very sensitively. I guess as parents, we've both had this conversation at some point, Ken.
Yeah, it's an important topic, and what I've done in my preparation from this is I've referenced a lecture that is in the Counselling Tutor CPD library. It's Nicola Hughes, and it's Children and Loss is the name of the lecture. So that's where I'm getting the information that I'm sharing with you at the moment. And when we're speaking about children, loss, death, grief, I mean, there is the way that you've just been introduced this topic, Rory, of having that discussion as a parent or a significant other in a young person's life. But there's also the other side of that, where we may be seeing this post somebody passing away. And just to share some statistics, and this is from childbereavement.org, and it's the death bereavement statistics. And these are sad numbers, but they are true numbers. A parent of a child under 18 dies every 22 minutes in the UK. That's around 23,600 a year. And it equates to around 111 children being bereaved of a parent every single day. So this is something real, this is something happening, and it is something that we may come into contact with, maybe from a client asking how they would work with their child if they've lost someone significant within the family, or if you're working with children and young people, you may be working with the child presenting themselves. And you mentioned the wishful or the magical thinking, and I think what it is when we are speaking about death to a child, whatever those circumstances may be, we want to be steering clear of euphemisms. So we want to be steering clear of using words that don't really depict what has happened. So euphemisms are popped his clogs, resting in peace, gone to meet their maker in a better place, crossed over, star in the sky now, gone through the pearly gates. And the reason that we don't use these maybe sayings that we as adults can understand is because this can be taken quite literally by the child, and it can lead into that fantasy thinking that I think you were alluding to, Rory, where the person still feels that the child still feels that person is around at some level, that they might see them again. And what we're called on to do in this situation is we need to be as honest and as direct and as plain as we can be. And that would be dependent on how old that child is and what their ability to understand is. But I think by being honest and open and just saying how it is, and what the child will look to the other significant adult in their life. So if somebody has been lost in a family, the child will look to the other members of the family as significant others, and will take their understanding of the grieving process and of death from those others, and it may well be those others that we might end up working with within our sessions, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think I'll pick up on your points on the euphemisms and the magical thinking. I've got a couple of friends who lost their parents after they'd had an argument. So they'd had a very big argument with one particular person, with mum, and went out and then came back and mum had died. And he carried it right through his childhood into the adulthood into his adulthood, and believed somehow that his words had caused death, and that if he hadn't have had that argument with mum might be alive. And certainly for younger children, this can be a very, very real phenomena. They can believe that what they've said, they've been naughty, and as a consequence, a parent has died. And also with euphemisms, when people say, well, they've gone on to the other side, certainly a child of my daughter's age would say, well, where is this other side? Can I go to this other side and see them? So we have to be very, very careful. And I think it's a good time actually to bring up neurodivergent children who may be autistic. They would struggle with euphemisms even more, Ken, because some neurodivergent children don't have the subtlety. Some neurodivergent adults don't have the subtlety to be able to separate euphemism from actuality. So we have to be very, very thoughtful and very, very child age appropriate. And I think that if you're working with, say, under fives, there are some behaviours that we can pick up. They may sense the loss without understanding death, and they may become clingy, withdrawn, or need more comfort. And also regressing behaviours, so things like bedwetting are very, very common. So those are the kind of things to look out for, because they don't have the life experience or the kind of cognitive development to be able to conceptualize death. Well, who does? It's such a huge thing, isn't it, when somebody you love dies? And over 5 to 11, they may ask repetitive questions. So it may be they asked about how someone died, are they coming back? And those questions, you may say, well, I've already answered those, but it's not unusual for children to keep asking those questions. And I guess what they're looking for is some form of reassurance. They're trying to conceptualize what's happened. And acting out, I always really have a strong reaction to where people say, well, a child's acting out. What they're trying to do is that their behaviour is reflecting their inner world. And if someone's acting out, my rule of thumb here is all behaviour is goal-directed. Yeah. You just need to understand the goal. Once you understand the goal, you understand the behaviour, Ken, right?
Yeah, very, very much so. And the kind of behaviours that we may see, withdrawal, regression, becoming clingy, is another behavior that you may see. Behavioral problems where they go out of character, the child goes out of character and develops problems that we haven't seen before. Risk-taking behaviors, there can be harm to self within this. Poor punctuality, truant, difficulties with concentration and learning, preoccupied, forgetful, hitting out. So these are all possible reactions to grief. And I think that we don't only see these in children. I think this is part of being human. The grief is a natural process. It is a natural process. And one of the things we need to recognize is that with grief being such a natural process, not everybody's going to reach out, and not everybody needs specialist intervention and help to get through grief, because it is something that humans have been going through since the dawn of time and will continue to go through. But we do the CPD so that we are aware that when somebody does come and look for some help, that we understand this topic at enough depth to be able to serve and be there with that person. And you spoke about the thoughts that can play out, that a person might be left with. And these are the kind of thoughts that can carry on right from childhood into adulthood and be a script that kind of informs how the person will live out their life. It's my fault that they died. In some way, I was part of that. It may be I can't create bonds with people because all the people I care about eventually are just going to die, and I know how painful that is. So I'm going to avoid that by avoiding closeness with others. There could be almost a why did you leave me? There can be an anger. That person has left me. This world is not a fair place. These are the kind of things that the reactions that we may see, that the world is not a safe place for me. And these can be reenacted as adults. And we've said so often, Rory, when our client is in the room, if that's a grown adult in our room, and we're working therapeutically with that person, we're also working with the child and everything that child has gone through within their life. And, you mentioned, Rory, possible ways of working with a child, and films work for children. Even The Lion King, there's death in The Lion King, and it's a way of developing understanding. I remember Bambi was of my time, I guess, with the little with the little buck, and its mum passed away, and it was really sad. It was sad as a child to watch it, but it does at some level show that circle of life, as you said, Rory. There are really good books available that kind of speak about the circle or the pathway of life, and good films as well. And we will definitely, I think, within this topic, on the show notes page, we'll put some links, or at least a list of some suggested resources. There's quite a lot here that I've been able to take from Nicola Hughes's lecture on this topic, because she goes really deep into this. And if you're a member of the Counsellor CPD library, log in and just search children and loss, and go and watch that CPD lecture. It's about an hour long, but it's really detailed and really, really useful. I certainly found it useful in the research for today, but we will include some of those resources in the show notes as well. Any other thoughts on this, Rory?
Yeah, I think that don't avoid talking about death. I think that it's one of the great taboos, but when I grew up, no one talked about sex or death. You talked about it, and you were considered impolite. And it seems to me through the last 40 years, people are quite happy to talk about aspects of their sex lives or their emotional lives. But when it comes to death, we're probably not as communicative as other countries. I mean, in Mexico, I believe they have something called the Day of the Dead, where they celebrate death. They remember death. We tend to not in the UK, and I was kind of reminded that when we had deaths in our family, when the hearse turned up at the house, people in our street would shut the curtains. I think that says everything. We turn your back on it. Don't look. In case it comes for you, which inevitably it will. So if you've got children, sit down, have the conversation, use the resources that we're going to supply in the show notes, and take the opportunity, because I think if it's not discussed, then it will come back to the child who becomes an adult to bite them. It'll be something that'll carry through their life. So let's have a more open conversation about something that's a real natural phenomenon. It'll happen to all of us, Ken. Not today, but it will happen to all of us.
Yes. And as we kind of come to the end of this, I want to share something that I think is really, really useful. And again, this will be linked in the show notes for this episode. We'll kind of direct you there in a moment. And it's based on William Worden's 1996 study, which was a 2-year study, and it's called The 12 Needs of a Bereaved Child. A child needs clear, comprehensive information about death. That's where we started this topic. A child needs to be allowed to express feelings that they have, and the fears that they have, and the anxieties soothed around those. A child needs reassurance that they are not responsible for the death. They need to be told directly and reassured that they weren't part of that. and that this is something that happens in life. A child needs to have someone who will listen attentively so that their feelings will be acknowledged and respected. And you spoke about the different ages and what the understanding at those ages might be. And even at those younger ages, we may think, oh, well, they don't fully understand it, but they still need their thoughts and feelings validated. It's so important. A child needs help gaining perspective of their own emotions and to understand that it's okay and that it does take a little bit of time. A child needs to be involved and included in open grieving. And you spoke about closing the windows, hiding away, and you know that again, the child will look to the other caregivers and the other family members to see how they grieve, and they will take their cue from there. So we don't want to only do our grieving while the child is locked away. We want to do that openly to show that this is natural and normal. The child needs permission to continue with interests and activities. The world doesn't stop. They can still go play with their friends, go to the park, go and play football, go to their dance lesson, whatever it is. Child needs to see other people grieve and learn how grief works in the group that they belong to. There's just a few more. A child needs an opportunity to say goodbye to the person who has died and have opportunities to remember that person throughout their lives. And I think that's so important. You know, when we experience loss, and I've certainly experienced my fair share of loss in life, we're left with the memories of those people and revisiting those memories and remembering that person. A child needs reassurance that they will be cared for, that they're going to be okay, that person has gone away and they're not going to come back, but it's okay. Somebody loves them and somebody's got them and will hold them. And number 12, a child needs a safe companion to respond to their questions, no matter how many times they ask those questions or how many questions they have, to have that patience and be there for them. Great topic. Thank you very much, Rory. So we're speaking children and loss here. You can get the handout and the references to some films, to some books, some references to Nicola Hughes's lecture on this in the Counselling Tutor CPD library. And you can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. That is our website. Click on the podcast tab, find your way to episode 337. That's today's episode. That's a free download for you. It is in the show notes. Go and get it. This is an important topic. Good CPD opportunity here, I think. And if you're a member of the CPD library, I really call on you, log in and go and watch that lecture on children and loss. If you're not a member of the CPD library and you're wondering what that is, well, it's a library absolutely packed with lectures from top professionals, hundreds of hours of lectures, all with certification. And the price of entry is less than a coffee for two per month. It really is. It's and you can get information on that by going to counsellingtutor.com. And that, Rory, is today's ethical, sustainable practice. And we move now into Practice Matters, where, Rory, you spoke to our very good friend and returning guest on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, Catherine Knibbs.
I did. It's true, Ken. And we discussed a little reported news item that Apple, the people who make your phone and your computers and a few other household gadgets, had removed part of their encryption from their iCloud on request of the UK government, the current UK government, and the ramifications that this might have. So I know that Catherine is a technologist. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say about encryption and storing clients' data in general.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Today we're looking at a story with potential implications for counsellors and psychotherapists. On February the 21st, 2025, Apple quietly removed its advanced data protection tool in the UK. This feature offered end-to-end encryption for iCloud data, which could impact those therapists who hold sensitive material like therapy notes on iCloud. I am joined by Catherine Knibbs, a digital rights advocate and privacy researcher, and together we'll explore what this means for those of us working with confidential client information. So, Catherine, welcome back.
Yes, and it forms part of a bigger picture, which we'll probably discuss. But hello, Rory, welcome. We're going to do this topic many more times, I think. And whilst many of us are in a space, and I'm doing that thing where I'm thinking about, many of us are in the space at the minute where we're worrying about AI, and I am going to steal Gary Hibbert's sentence here. We've all focused on AI because we can't spell GDPR in terms of it's too complicated. And actually, here we are again with a big problem if we don't know what we're doing as counsellors and psychotherapists. So the big problem is, if you are unaware of how technology works and how you keep your data safe, then what's recently happened has bypassed everybody. And I think I made a flippant comment on LinkedIn, something along the lines of, counsellors and psychotherapists, have you been given direction about what you need to know now? And I know that it was rhetorical, it was sarcastic, because the answer's no. And the reason the answer's no is exactly what you've said, Rory. It's come under the radar yet again about what these changes mean, where we're now sitting in 2025, and the potential for data use and access by this particular government. So on the surface, we're going to talk about Apple, which is the best way to explain it is most people won't necessarily know how an iPhone or an iPad works. They just use the iPad. But what I'm going to say is there are certain apps and certain things on your Apple device that are by default given what's called end-to-end encryption. So when you're talking to somebody on iMessage, for example, one of the things people might have noticed if they are an Apple user is not so long ago when you tried to send a message to another device, it will come up with a small message on your Apple device saying this message is protected by RCS, which is the way that messages are kept encrypted. Now, this issue cropped up for a few people in lockdown with all of the hullabaloo around Zoom and was it end-to-end encrypted and what did that actually mean? So by default, iMessage is end-to-end encrypted. Your photographs, your documents that you keep on if you're a Mac user as well, the documents that you keep and you might upload to iCloud are not necessarily end-to-end encrypted. So what Apple have effectively done is said, you can lock the door to your house, but all of the documents within your house are available if I was to break in. That's essentially what they've done with this ADP. So this is Advanced Data Protection. Because previously we had the front door locked and then everything else was housed in a lockable cabinet. And that's the way that Apple protected us. Not only did we have the locked door, we also had the locked cabinet, and we were the only people who could unlock it. What it means now is pretty much if the government or the Home Office wanted to access some of that data, they can go past that first level and take documents, they can access emails, they could have a look at a number of things on our devices that don't have the ADP protection, even though the P stands for protection. But it's essentially saying you get to lock your front door, but actually we can go in the house when we want.
Yes, and I'm not the most technically minded person, I have to say, but the way I read it was that when you send information to iCloud, say what a store you picked. I've got an iCloud account, store my pictures of my grandkids on it because it takes up so much room on my phone. But I send it, and it's encrypted at rest. So in other words, as soon as I switch my phone off, it's encrypted, and then when I send it across the internet to the storage locker at iCloud, if you like, it's encrypted in travel, and it stays there. So if anybody broke in the locker, they wouldn't find anything that they could use. It'd just be a scramble of zeros and ones. And what Apple's capitulation has been, and I use the word capitulation because they are the biggest tech company in the world, and they have rolled over to the British government. They've said, yes, they've taken off that ability to have that cabinet locked. So it's now not encrypted at their end to the same degree, which means that, I guess with a court order,
There would have to be. There would have to be
a government agency can look in. So I guess some people will say, well, why is that a problem? Because surely if it's got a court order, then that must be serious, and the government doing the right thing, or the police, or the security services. So surely that has to be a good thing. It stops people hiding things, like child pornography or proceeds of drug dealing and criminality. So why is it a bad thing for therapists?
So this brings, I was just about to say, actually, phone recordings. So this is really, 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 really important for students taking their session recordings on their devices. So also, it's very similar with Google Drive. So Google Drive, if you upload your documents and things like that on there, they're not end-to-end encrypted either. So this is not now about Apple on its own. This is about, yes, if there was a court order. Now, the thing about a court order is that would suggest that somebody had been arrested and there was a need for an investigation, or a need for maybe the police or the court proceedings to come and have a look at your documents. Actually, this has now changed slightly, and this is what I was briefly crying about before we even started recording this podcast. This is because there is a new law that is about to be ratified called the Data and Access. It's the Data Use and Access Law, right? This has slipped under everybody's radar, and this includes data protection and information security people that I hang around with. This has gone through Parliament. It has not been picked up by many of us. And what this actually means is the government, the Home Office, and any other law enforcement that's involved in any particular investigation can now make that request. And it means that they now have access to particular parts of our data. So we will probably have a conversation about that another time when I actually understand this document and what it means for health and social care, because there are going to be changes, one of which is the Information Commissioner's officer, the ICO officer, who used to be Elizabeth Dunham, and I've now forgotten who the new person is. That person has just been taken off, and it's now being changed to the Information Commission. Mm-hmm. So this is going to have big changes at data protection level. So we are back into 2016 to 2018, where we're just finding our feet. Then we're going to know exactly what we need to know. But right now, what I'm going to suggest for everybody who is practicing in counselling and psychotherapy is to think about how you take information about your clients, what you do with the information, whether it's a third-party piece of software, whether you're writing up documents on Word, whether, yes, you're now bringing in AI transcript or AI programs to help you do what you're doing as a job, and then where you store that data, because we are now at risk of the potential of anybody in those spaces like law enforcement or certainly the Home Office making an inquiry that covers things like wanting to know if child sexual abuse material might be on somebody's device, and that might be one of your clients. It might be a conversation that you've had. It might be about somebody who is a threat to the government. And this is where conversations you and I had not so long ago about who, why, what was the ADP removed. And as I said to you when we were talking, Rory, there is this has followed the riots that took place last year in summer. So this is now about the government, and this is about their access to data that belongs to the general public, and that includes us as professionals.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because for those of us who followed data protection closely, and certainly as data protection officer for Counselling Tutor and two other companies, my other companies, I look with interest at the Americans, because the Americans' data protection was altered significantly with something called the Patriot Act after 9/11, which effectively sounds like, I'm not an expert on American law enforcement or data protection, but it effectively sounds like it's the same thing. In other words, law enforcement can get unimpeded access to people's information, whether they believe it's secure or not. And it does bring up I guess a wider question, which probably is not for this podcast, how much access do we give the government? And the old saying of who watches the watchers. It's okay saying, well, this is to protect us, but who watches them? And you know, yes.
Exactly. and the worry is, I mean, if I was to surmise this new data use and access legislation law, whatever they're going to call it, when it's ratified, which won't be far off, because it's passed so many stages undetected by many of us, that actually there is something here about it allows them access to past data. Now, I'm not saying that the UK government is going to be in our devices and in our phones or anything like that, but this is about really thinking about what do we do without thinking. What do we automatically start to do? And most of us have moved into a world of technology without stopping and thinking about the use of this technology. And this is certainly something I've been on my high horse at times about since 2018. And there is now this thing about all that fighting and all that campaigning that I did in terms of we need to be protecting this stuff seems to have been quite moot now, because actually the government said, well, maybe we'll just have a look at some of this stuff if we deem necessary. Now, given we've had the riots, given the Online Safety Act was ratified in October 2023, there are now changes that the government wants to do, and people may well have seen that the Misuse of Computers Act has been used, Misuse of Communications Act has been used to arrest people. What this is an update to something called PECA as well, which is the Processing of Electronic Communications Regulation. So this is the same as GDPR, but this also means that technically the government can have access to anybody that they consider somebody that needs to be watched for any reason. And that can include trafficking, drugs, violence, child sexual abuse imagery, the things that are part of the Online Safety Act. So this has become the new digital terrain of which they need to be in charge, really.
Yeah, and I think we'd agree that, you know, what you've mentioned, you know, drug trafficking, child pornography, things related to terrorism. We would hope that our government takes that seriously, and would hope that they would make every effort to try to access information to prevent or detect or to prosecute those who are getting involved in these very, very serious activities. And I suppose, you know, I suppose if the government were here to provide balance, they would say that's exactly right, Rory. You know, but I think the undertow of this is that it does give them unimpeded access. It sounds like that. Although on the face of it, it's very, very, you know, very serious, and they can get the information they want. What it's done, it's opened the door to maybe, shall we say, more whimsical inquiries.
And who's to know, as you've said there with the watchers, who's to know what those whimsical questions might be about? But also, my question is, and what does that mean for my data? Because I'm sitting thinking as a consumer here, if you like, and what are the government going to do with my data? Who are they going to sell that on to? How is that going to be mined? How is that going to be protected? How will they ensure that if they investigate something, if I don't know, maybe they look into, I don't know, let's just pretend that I saw Prince Harry for a minute, right? In terms of, let's pretend that Prince Harry was my client. What would they need in order to be able to access certain things because actually he's a person of interest? And then how would that protect me if I was the professional who provided that service? So in the last 2 weeks, I have been sitting trying to work out exactly what this means for us as individuals, what this means for us as businesses, what it means for us as a profession. Yes,
it seems to be a sea change, and I seem to remember when the American government at the time issued the Patriot Act, which allowed effectively unimpeded access to citizens' data. European Union threw their hands up in horror. In fact, there are lots of reciprocal agreements of data sharing between the United States of America and Europe were broken, and we have to now go through what they call clauses. We have to look at each individual provider in America and satisfy ourselves that to beyond reasonable doubt that they will secure the data, where before it was just a basically we agreed with it, and it looks like the UK is going down the same road. What would your advice or observations be to therapists listening to this and thinking, I really don't like data protection? It's like the eating my greens. Everybody wants the main food, the meat or the vegetarian option, but no one actually likes the greens. It's important. Data protection is important. It can have ramifications. What would your advice be to therapists listening to this and think, this is all very well and good, Catherine, Rory, but what do I do now? What practical actions can I take?
Well, I mean, the first one would be if you have recordings of your sessions on your phone, in terms of on an iPhone. I mean, the issue is for most people, the moment they plug it in to charge it, if you're connected to the internet on Wi-Fi, it's automatically going to back up. So this means understanding the settings on your devices in the first instance. What gets moved to where does it go from your phone? So I'm pretending that it's almost like a file shuffling process. Before you plug the charger in to back it up, where do you back up to? How do you protect the documents on your device? And it does mean that people do now need to be that tech savvy person. And I know I used to say that a lot in terms of we have to be tech savvy. This is part of our role nowadays, and technology is not going anywhere. We use it as part of our practice, therefore we must understand what we're doing. It's almost the same as the tool. You wouldn't hand a chainsaw to a tiny child without, allowing them to learn about the dangers, go near it as they got older. You would use common sense and processes. So really, this is a call to action actually on the membership bodies. They should be giving really good advice to us all, staying up to date on this legislation, helping us understand what our role is, and helping us be guided in training, which, yes, it can sound complicated. And I know I can get quite excited about technology as a whole, but I also know that if I'm going to be doing something with a client, and maybe I'm writing a report, because obviously I work for a lot of children, and if I'm writing a report, I've just had an argument actually with somebody today about sending an email that they wanted password protected, and I said I don't do that. And considering that I've written at large extents and books about this, it would go against my integrity to then send something in that manner because that person doesn't know how to use this particular platform.
Yes.
So again, we have to get educated on how do we protect things. So, for example, I used to use a service a long time ago. Sadly, it's gone out of business, but I now use Egress, which is a company, funnily enough, that is owned by an American company, but they actually have a UK base. So when I'm sending emails in this country, it does go through their servers. I had to go and look at the history, the policies, the terms and conditions. I had to do all of that subject clause investigation. And yes, I know that can be tiresome. I really do know how difficult it is to read through 300 pages of treacle terms and conditions. But it is an expectation that if we're going to provide a service to somebody and we've got emails, text messages, I know some people use FaceTime, WhatsApp, Zoom, whatever it is we're doing, we must understand the service and the provider of the service, but also what happens to our data. Where does it go when it goes into, she's doing air quotes now, the internet?
Yes. I mean, I think that's the nub of it, isn't it? Because we're so used to our devices. I have an iPhone and mine backs up without charging up. I will put something on it and it will just, as soon as it connects to a Wi-Fi hotspot, it will go. And I think one practical thing that I always used to say to my students was, do not use your phone for recording client sessions, because it is the clue's in the name, it's a smart phone. And smart means it makes decisions for you on your behalf that you may not be aware of. And one of those things is that it might send it off to the cloud, and you don't know where that's being stored, or you might not sure about the terms and conditions. You could accidentally send it to somebody Because nowadays every app has a little box with an arrow in, and you press it, and you can send it to you. You can send it to your, I don't know, your Facebook or your YouTube or your Instagram or your TikToks or all that. That could be easily done, or someone else could do it. Oh, look at this, click, whang, gone. And once it's gone, there's no getting it back. Once it's on the internet, it's on the internet forever. And I used to use a voice recorder. It was a little device like a microphone with a red button. You press record, and it moved it onto a memory card. And it was a dumb device. It didn't connect externally to the internet unless I plugged it in, which of course I never did. So that would be and I know a lot of tutors are against that. I think, Kath,
the good old-fashioned dictaphone is the way. I mean, this was something, and double bagging things like that so that it doesn't accidentally fall out of your bag, and understanding that if you think about what would you do with a physical device where like you're talking about there, if you took that into a therapy room and you pressed record, you would hold on to that tape for dear life. You wouldn't give it to your sister, your friend, your uncle. You wouldn't say, have a listen to that. You would say, no, you can't listen to that. It's confidential.
Yes.
So we need to think of technology. I know they get called smartphones. I call them I like to help phones, because that's what Apple provided us is. And AI has been in these phones for such a long time, since around the iPhone 4 and 5, where it would say to you, oh, I've seen this person in your email. Maybe this is the person who's calling you because their phone number matches the one that was in an email that they sent you maybe 2 years ago. And it kind of helps, and I'm doing that kind of, it's a helpful device that says maybe this is this, maybe this is that. And I think that's led to a lot of the issues that we have where we go, oh, isn't that handy? And then we start to buy into the technological change without stopping and thinking, hey, hang on a minute, why has it just done that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of food for thought there. I know that ethical bodies or professional bodies listen to the podcast, and maybe you coming on today will be a jolt and a call to action, and maybe someone will say, perhaps we should be looking at this. Professional bodies are like us all. There's so much going on that some stuff does slide under the radar, but maybe on hearing this, they may proffer advice or guidance. And I guess, it's for practitioners to take responsibility about how they store their data. It's your responsibility where that data's stored, who has access to it, how it's kept, and then ultimately how it's deleted. And it may not be the most popular thing, data protection, when we come to looking at our practices.
You can't make it sexy.
You can't make it sexy, but it is an essential thing in the service of our clients. So, Kath Knibbs, thank you again for joining us.
Massive thank you to a great friend of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, to Catherine Knibbs. And then a very important topic. I think this day and age that we live in now, it's becoming more and more difficult to keep clients' details confidential. It really is. Back in the day when you just wrote it down on a piece of paper, had a split note system in a filing cabinet. When I'm showing my age here, Rory, of when I trained. But that is, of course, our practice matters. And we now move into, speaking of studying counselling, to student services, where we see you, students, on your formal journey to become counsellors and psychotherapists. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're talking about when a client doesn't attend your session. Oh, it can be so downheartening, Rory. It can be frustrating, Rory. And it can also be scary from a level of, did I do something wrong? Am I doing this right? Am I going to get my hours in? Can bring up a lot of emotions. And we hear about this topic often, don't we, Rory?
We do. And I've spent many an hour on a rainy January afternoon or evening where I used to have my student counselling practice, sat waiting for my client, and they never showed up. And I'd given an hour of my time away, or booked an hour of my time away, and I'd go and I'd be, a little downhearted and think, will I ever hit this 100 hours? Will I ever get to this 100 hours? And then a few months after I'd had a DNA, I was reminded of something that has really stayed with me throughout my life, or certainly my professional life. And it was the lead therapist. I worked at Mind in Ashton-under-Lyne, wonderful organisation. Hi to everyone at Mind in Ashton. And I noticed that the lead therapist was standing looking out the window. And I said, "You okay?" She said, yeah. And she said, "No, my client hasn't turned up." And I said, "Oh, gosh, And she said, "I wonder what's happening in that person's life." And she was obviously in a kind of whimsical, thoughtful mood. And, she said, you don't know what goes on in other people's lives. And many years later, I came across something called extra therapeutic factors. And those are things that are really out of control of maybe the therapist and the client. Things like financial situations. It could be a childcare issue that can't be resolved. It could be that you can't afford the bus fare to come to the therapy, or there's other more pressing things than therapy. They've got caring responsibilities, and I think it's so easy to focus on ourselves, and rightly so. You're going to need to get your 100 hours, but sometimes I think looking at the wider aspects of the client's world can be a bit reassuring in those situations, because if you're working for an agency, the therapy is usually free, and that means that it's usually the people who arguably need it the most are trying to access it, but they have other things going on in their lives, and I think that if you feel quite downhearted, supervision is always a good place to discuss it, and also your training circle at wherever you've been taught, because you won't be the only one who's had DNAs. It does happen. If you practice, even in professional practice, I've had DNAs, so it does happen, but it can have a bit of an impact on students, I think, their own kind of self-worth.
Yes, two sides to this coin. I'm going to start on the side that you were on there, Rory, with what it means to you as a student. Then I want to turn the coin over and say, what can you do with that time when it comes? Because you are going to have DNAs. DNA stands for do not attend. That's what a DNA is. So I think we need to recognize that the clients coming into therapy is their therapy. They actually have a right to not come. Maybe they don't need it anymore. Maybe they don't want it anymore. Maybe it didn't feel like it was a fit for them, and they didn't feel that they could say that when they came into the session. Maybe it's just like you said, Rory, something that's going on that day, and they might be at the next session. So it can be frustrating. We can look at ourselves and say, what have I done? Is this me? Or we can just recognize that DNAs are part of being a counsellor, both in placement and in private practice. It's part of being in any service delivery. You're going to have DNAs. It's just part of the deal. And what can you do about it? Well, if you're a student, you're going to have assignments, you're going to have personal development things to write about, you're going to have journals to write about, you're going to have studies to do to understand your base theory of your modality to do. So what I would do when I was at placement and I had my fair share of DNAs was I took along my work from my training. And I would do revision, I would do work on assignments, I would read books, and I would stay there because I went into my placement. It was at a medical center, and I would sit in the medical center. I was there anyway. Sometimes I would have more than one client, so I had the hour where I would sit if the client didn't come. I needed to stay because I had another client, so I couldn't go home. And I would use that time to deepen my studies. So the time was always very, very useful for me. And if you do find stuff coming up for you, so you start going, oh, what have I done wrong? Maybe I'm not the right fit for this person. It's great to write about that, because you're going to have to put in a personal development piece of work as well to gain your qualification. And it's great to speak about how you maybe felt that you weren't doing a good enough job, and how that was for you, and how you took that to supervision, and how you found your way and navigated through that. So there's some things that you can do with that time. And then I also wanted to add in that you may see less DNAs as you go forward into your professional career on graduation. And the reason I say that is very often placement practice is free at delivery. So the person might not be paying for that service. And sadly, there is a psychological phenomena that plays out that when you don't pay for something, you value it less. If somebody had paid you £1,000 an hour and they'd already put that money down and paid it to be with you in a counselling session, well, I know if I paid £1,000 for an hour of something, I'd certainly be there. Even if I was having an off day, I would so be there in the front row. And it's interesting when I look to South Africa. I've got some colleagues that practice in South Africa. They don't have a national healthcare system there, which is free at delivery. So counselling is a paid for expense. If you want to go to counselling, you're going to pay for it. And they have so few DNAs because people are paying the money beforehand, and they have a lot less DNAs. But sadly, we have service delivery here in the UK where often it is free. And maybe it's just not valued as much, or your time is not valued. And I know that this is not just in counselling and psychotherapy. Go to your doctors and you'll look around in the waiting room. You're going to see a little sign there speaking about how many wasted hours from people not arriving to their appointments and how much that costs the NHS. So it really is something that is just part of this process, I guess, Rory.
It is, and certainly towards the end of my student time at Mind, from memory, if my memory serves me correctly, they instigated a new policy. So anybody who wanted counselling would come in, get an assessment, and then they would be told the waiting time was 4 weeks, and then they'd be sent an appointment, which they had to confirm. It was a text-based appointment, and they had to click yes. And then they'd be contacted again to make the appointment. And a lot of therapists said, oh, it sounds like a lot of barriers towards therapy. But what actually happened was that by waiting 4 weeks, some people who'd come, who thought they needed therapy, actually had resolved their issues. The crisis had passed. And it just left a cohort of people who really did need help. They were waiting, they were willing to wait, and that cut DNAs down. So sometimes the actual referral system can contribute to DNAs. But I'm with Ken. I think that if someone doesn't attend, then you've got a great time. You've got an hour to, in Ken's case, to do some study or some revision. Or in a busy life, just an hour for yourself. You can sit and read. You don't have to read a counselling book. You can just take a book and have 1 hour of uninterrupted time. And for those people who have busy lives and children, I think that's a bit of a luxury, to be honest, Ken.
Yeah, I do, yes. And dare I say, you could also use that hour to listen to an episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Hey, why not indeed?
You could, yes.
So as we kind of come to the end of this topic of when clients do not attend your sessions, I wanted to touch on one point that I think is really important. If it's maybe the first appointment with this client and they don't arrive, then we don't look at ourselves and go, what did I do wrong? But what can leave you with feelings is when you've seen a client and they come to that first session and they're there and they're engaged and they're telling you what's going on for them. And at the end of the session, they go, right, I'll see you next week. And then next week comes and they don't come. And they may not ever come back again. And it can leave us going, did I say something? Did I do something? But here's something that I want to leave you with as we go out of this. The actual process that takes place because of therapy doesn't always take place in our counseling room when we are there with the client. The process actually happens within the client, and it can happen after our session. That client may have got what they needed. They got an opportunity to say what was going on for them, have somebody listen to that and reflect that back, and that may be just what they needed. So when a client doesn't come back, maybe you've done a good job. Maybe they've got what they needed out of that. Maybe that's a nice positive way to look at it, Rory. And of course, the other side of this is the paperwork side of it. You know, let's say, for instance, you have 6 or 12 sessions that you're able to offer, and the person doesn't come back on that second session. There will be some process of checking that they still want their place to keep that open for them. And I'm looking back on my placement, and around about 1/3 of my client hours were did not attend. I remember about halfway through my placement going, okay, I need to get another placement now because of I had enough appointments to fill up my 100 hours if everyone came, but they weren't coming. So about 1/3 of them didn't. So I took on another placement about halfway through my placement to get those extra hours in.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And yes, I've had clients where it's become very clear in that single session, they just wanted to be heard, they wanted to be witnessed and tell their story. And, you know, I think at the end we made an appointment, but we both knew underneath it all, they weren't going to come back. So don't be too hard on yourself. And, you know, I hope this conversation between me and Ken has been a bit of relief for you in a bit, because I know that people have commented in our Facebook group. If you're interested, go to Facebook Counselling Tutor, and you'll find our Facebook group. And I know it's a topic that's regularly discussed by very anxious students. So
yep.
I hope it brought some succor. Is that the word? Is it succor to to you, and you don't feel too stressed about it. Don't be too hard on yourself. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's an evergreen topic in the Facebook group. It was discussed when we were training counsellors as well, Rory, and it will be discussed way into the future because it's real. This has been episode 337 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, talking to children about death, a sensitive but essential subject that needs to be handled with care. And just as a reminder, don't forget to go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 337, and in the show notes we'll share a pile of resources that you can use if you are in that position, or you know of anyone else in the position of having to talk to a child about death. In Practice Matters, we talked to Catherine Knibbs about the impact of Apple removing end-to-end encryption on data storage and the impact on the storage of client notes and what therapists need to think about. A very comprehensive and very interesting conversation. And then finally, Ken and myself caught up to talk about when clients do not attend in student services. And we had a reflective conversation discussing the reality of do not attends for those of you who are in placements. Just to say thank you to all those people who like, share and subscribe to our podcast and share it across to their peers or to anyone else who may find it helpful. Your comments mean the world to us. And, we Ken and myself so enjoyed doing this podcast. We've done it for quite a few years now. So I guess until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.